Hey guys, tonight we are going to slip into a wool-lined nightmare called being a woman in medieval Europe. You'll wake up in a bed stuffed with straw and lice, your breath fogging in the chill air, while the chicken at the foot of your mattress flaps its wings and your husband mumbles something unintelligible about porridge. You're 25. But your joints say 70. You survived another night, congrats. But now comes the hard part, another day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the sun because medieval roosters don't care about your REM cycle. They scream like medieval car alarms at 4:30 a.m., which is generous considering your bed didn't offer much in the way of sleep. It's a straw mattress, lumpy, pokey, and likely home to a few colonies of fleas and lice. If you're lucky, there are only 2 mice under the blanket. If not, you've got a whole ecosystem going. Your pillow, if it exists, is made from chicken feathers or more straw, depending on your social standing. And the smell? A heady blend of last night's smoke, sweat, old wool, and something best not investigated in the corner chamber pot. You share this room with your husband. Also maybe the baby, 2 toddlers, your husband's cousin, and definitely 1 judgmental chicken. This one-room house is your bedroom, kitchen, living room, nursery, and mouse sanctuary all rolled into one convenient box. It's open concept before the concept was cool. You sit up, and every joint in your body protests. Knees crack. Back aches. You're 25 years old, but you feel ancient. That's medieval living for you. A full-body CrossFit workout every day, but instead of muscles, you gain chronic pain. And you can forget about changing into something fresh. You've worn the same linen shift for the past week, maybe 2. Laundry day is an epic event involving buckets, fire, ash, lye, rocks, and a good chance you'll ruin your hands. So unless it's visibly crawling away, you're wearing it again. Pulling on your scratchy wool overdress dyed a faint, sad brown, you feel the familiar rub of coarse seams on skin. If you own shoes, they are stiff leather and smell like every foot that's worn them since your great Aunt Mildred. Outside, it's cold. Inside, it's just a different flavor of cold. The fire in the hearth has long gone out. Which means one of your first tasks of the day will be relighting it. But not yet. First comes the mental prep for a to-do list that would make a modern task manager spontaneously combust. There's bread to knead and bake. There are animals to feed, chickens that don't lay, a cow that's moody, and a pig that may or may not bite children. You'll also fetch water, wrangle toddlers, start the weaving, maybe gather herbs if you dare, and, of course, avoid being accused of consorting with Satan. Because here's the deal, anything you do, literally anything, can be used against you. You're good at growing rosemary? Which? You helped deliver your neighbor's baby successfully? Which? You made someone uncomfortable with your resting face while walking past their cow, which died 3 days later. Triple which? Historians still argue whether most accusations stem from genuine belief or weaponized social grudges. But either way, the results were the same: suspicion, suffering, and sometimes flames. You glance at your husband. He's still snoring. But if he wakes up in a mood, or worse, if you remind him too much of your own mother, it could be a rough start. Legally, he's allowed to discipline you. As long as the stick is thinner than his thumb, it's fine. Medieval romance. And should you dare to protest, neighbors may begin whispering. A good Christian wife knows her place, after all. too much defiance and you're inviting the devil in. So, you say your morning prayers out loud. Not because you feel especially holy but because someone might be listening through the walls. Skipping them? Another step toward being impious, which is medieval for let's burn her just in case. And that's just the first few minutes of your day. You splash your face with water cold, stale, and potentially containing a curious floating thing you choose not to identify. The basin's been sitting out since yesterday, and you carried that water yourself, remember? From the well halfway down the lane, past a gossip gauntlet of neighbors pretending not to judge how many buckets you haul. No scented soaps await you. If you're among the hygienically ambitious, maybe you rub your teeth with a scrap of cloth. Salt if you're lucky. Chewing herbs like mint or fennel is the trendiest option, and it doesn't just help your breath, it might help you avoid the dentist. By which, of course, we mean the barber surgeon who uses pliers, prayers, and no anesthesia. Toothpaste? Not for a few hundred years. Toothbrushes? Ha! You're lucky if you have most of your teeth. Dental care in this century is mainly a spiritual exercise. Please, God, let this abscess not kill me. Now, let's talk about body odor. Or rather, don't. Because medieval people didn't either. Everyone smelled. You smelled. Your kids smelled. The chickens smelled. The idea was, if everyone reeked equally, no one could judge. Unless, you didn't smell. That could mean one of two things, wealth, or witchcraft. You see, perfume existed, mostly for the wealthy. Infused oils, floral water, perhaps a splash of rose-scented vinegar. But if you peasant woman with a slightly elevated social presence happen to smell vaguely pleasant, that's suspicious. That's unnatural. And here's where the fun begins, bathing. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did wash. Just, not much. Full baths were seasonal events, sometimes linked to religious holidays, or if you were sick and hoping not to die. Spot cleaning hands, face, armpits was more regular. But privacy was rare, and suspicion was plentiful. Bathing too often could be interpreted as vanity. And vanity? That's a sin. And sins? Those attract demons. Or at least the attention of those neighbors who think your rosemary bush looks a little too healthy. Even worse, bathing alone was considered deeply strange. After all, what are you hiding? A devil's mark? An unnatural mole? A third nipple? You laugh now, but those were literally considered evidence of consorting with evil. Historians still argue whether early attitudes toward cleanliness were more theological or practical, but they agree on one thing: they were definitely paranoid. And if you're thinking public bathhouses offered a safe solution, think again. While once common in towns, by the later Middle Ages, especially after the Black Death, these places were shuttered or condemned as dens of disease and loose morals. You were either dirty, suspiciously clean, or just dirty in public. Choose wisely. Then there's the challenge of keeping clean while menstruating. Modern period products? No. Instead, you're using reusable rags washed in secret, hidden while drying, never spoken of. You bleed, you rinse, you pray no one sees the stains or smells the iron in the air. Menstrual blood wasn't just taboo. It was considered powerful. And not in a divine feminine way. We're talking kills crops, rusts metal, spoils food levels of suspicion. Imagine trying to dry a cloth discreetly behind the fire, only to have a nosy neighbor drop by and catch sight of it. That's enough for a whispered accusation. She dries red cloth by moonlight. You know what that means. And if you happen to be on good terms with your own body, maybe you've figured out how to track your cycle, ease cramps with herbs, or even prevent pregnancy. Congratulations! You're now a midwife, or a healer, or a sorceress, depending on who's talking and how bad their harvest was. Some women leaned into this with caution. They used common herbs, mint, sage, chamomile to soothe symptoms. But woe to the one who reached for rue or pennyroyal, known for reproductive effects. Your helpful brew might become Exhibit A in a witch trial. Pregnancy was no safer. You'd be warned against bathing in later stages. It might disturb the baby, or worse, encourage evil spirits. After childbirth, you'd follow a strange collection of rituals to keep both you and the child from corruption. And your hair? Covered. Always. Especially if married. That linen cap isn't just a modesty accessory, it's a hygiene shield. Since you don't wash your hair often, a couple times a year if you're fancy, keeping it tied up and covered spares everyone from the sight and the implied questions about how your braid looks so well kept. Even cleanliness, if too consistent, could get you noticed. She never scratches at fleas, a neighbor might whisper. No lice. Her scalp must be protected by something unnatural. And it's not paranoia if it gets you tied to a stake. Combing for lice became a bonding activity among women. Done publicly, it was normal. Done privately, it was weird. Think of it as medieval self-care but with a risk factor. You might remember how chamomile soothes sleep and digestion. Or that rosemary can mask the smell of spoiling meat. But if you're caught gathering these herbs at dusk? If someone sees you muttering to yourself while you pick lavender? Yeah. You're not a healer anymore. You're the village's next moral hazard. You'd think taking a bath would be a universally good idea. But welcome to medieval logic where cleanliness could literally kill you. Not from germs, mind you. From gossip. Let's say it's midsummer, and you've managed to heat some water over the hearth. You're planning a full body rinse, rare, risky, and hopefully refreshing. But now you've got a new worry: who might see you doing it? Bathing too frequently makes you look vain. And vanity, as we know, is a sin. Too much sin, and the devil takes notice. Too much attention to your body, and suddenly the whispers start. Why does she scrub behind her ears? What's she hiding? Historians still debate how frequently the average medieval woman bathed, but the consensus is, not often, and definitely not without consequence. Some scholars argue that the decline of public bathhouses, once thriving centers of cleanliness and community, was less about disease and more about moral panic. After all, where there's soap and steam, there might also be temptation. In earlier centuries, cities had bathhouses open to the public. Men and women might bathe in shifts or sometimes, controversially, together. But over time, these places gained reputations for promiscuity. And after the Black Death, fears of disease made things even worse. By the later medieval period, bathhouses were vanishing, and bathing became something you did quietly, if at all. Especially if you were a woman. Let's imagine you have a private washing routine. You cover the windows. You use water you fetched yourself. You even boil rosemary into it, to help with your aching joints. But just as you pour it into the basin, there's a knock on the door. It's your neighbor. She's come by to borrow some firewood, but her eyes linger on the herbs, the steam, the covered window. Suspicious. She goes home and tells her husband. He tells the priest. The next Sunday, the priest preaches a sermon about excessive concern with the flesh. Everyone nods. No one looks at you directly, but suddenly, your name is on lips across the village. So maybe you skip the bath. But what if you're on your period? There are no pads. No tampons. No disposable anything. Just cloth rags washed, reused, and hopefully not spotted by your father-in-law hanging by the hearth to dry. And yet even these basic tools can betray you. You see, menstruation wasn't just taboo. It was terrifying. Blood, especially blood from a woman's body, was considered spiritually dangerous. Superstitions said it could ruin crops, spoil milk, even rust iron. And the idea of you walking around with this potent substance? Unsettling. To the wrong eyes, it looked like proof of sorcery. Let's say your husband finds the drying cloths and recoils. He tells the priest. The priest tells the bishop. And now, a midwife is sent to examine you for unusual marks. All because of a natural bodily function. Pregnancy? It's not much better. Late in pregnancy, you're told not to bathe at all. Water is risky. Air is risky. Life is risky. You labor without sterile tools, without anesthesia, and without real medical knowledge. If the baby dies, you might be blamed. If you die, the village might breathe easier. Childbirth was one of the few areas where women were allowed authority. Midwives held vital knowledge passed down through generations about herbs, timing, posture, pressure. But if too many mothers died under your care? If a baby came out wrong, or ill, or too small, suddenly you're not a helper. You're a suspect. And those herbs you use, mint for nausea, mugwort for labor pain, yarrow to stop bleeding, become witches' tools in the eyes of an angry husband or a panic priest. Even after birth, your hygiene rituals could be used against you. Let's say you washed the newborn with rosemary water, something your grandmother swore by. Then the baby catches a fever. Coincidence? Or evidence? You'd better hope the local monk approves of your methods. Because one whispered out about your postnatal practices, and your neighbors might be digging a pit for you instead of the placenta. And your hair, don't even think about letting it down. Married women must cover their heads. Always. Uncovered hair isn't just scandalous, it's a sign of spiritual disorder. And spiritual disorder leads straight to devil talk. So you cover it. Not just because you're modest, but because you're tired. Because you're careful. Because one slip a braid spotted in moonlight, a too clean child, a clove of garlic hung too strategically over your door, and suddenly you're not just the woman who tends herbs. You're that woman. Parasites, of course, are everywhere. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs crawl freely across homes and heads. Combing for lice is social, normal, even kind of bonding. But what if you never seem to scratch? What if your children never get bit? People start asking questions. And the answer they come to isn't cleanliness. It's curse. Because if they have lice, and you don't, you must have help. Dark help. And those bundles of drying herbs hanging from your rafters? They are not practical. They are suspicious. Just like you. You're still half asleep when it starts the quiet mental inventory of chores that must be done before the sun even hits the middle of the sky. And somehow, the day feels longer than it did yesterday. First, you rekindle the hearth. If the coals died during the night, you'll need flint and steel to coax new life into the ashes. And let's be honest, you'll probably just borrow hot embers from your neighbor. But make sure to smile sweetly while doing it, because refusing to lend coals, or asking for them too often, is the kind of thing that ends up being whispered about behind hands. With the fire barely crackling, it's time to prep breakfast. You're making pottage again, a vague, soupy mystery of boiled grains and root vegetables. If you're lucky, there's a slice of bread to go with it. If you're really lucky, it isn't moldy. Protein, a luxury reserved for feasts and funerals. Most days, it's just gruel and guesswork. Then, the animals. Chickens clucking. Cow mooing. Goats being goats. Their needs take priority. Feed, water, clean. Collect eggs assuming the hens have cooperated. Milk the cow, assuming she's in a decent mood. It's still barely morning, and you've lifted more weight than a modern gym session. And your body? Already aching. Back creaking. Fingers stiff. You don't stretch. You don't meditate. You endure. This is just the start. Because now begins the central marathon of your day, everything else. Grain to grind. Bread to knead. Buckets to carry. Children to chase. Your water-fetching trips alone might take up 2 hours, hauling 10 to 20 gallons for drinking, cooking, cleaning. And if the water's murky? Too bad. You're not getting dysentery alone, everyone is. And speaking of everyone, the kids. There's always one teething, one crying, one suspiciously quiet. You can't supervise them full-time, so you swaddle the baby and place them in a cradle by the hearth, say a quick prayer they don't roll into the fire, and keep going. Older children help. A 5-year-old feeds the chickens. A 7-year-old helps with a spindle. You don't teach them, you absorb them into your workday. You watch out of the corner of your eye while you scrub, spin, stir, and sew. Historians still argue whether medieval mothers had emotional bonds similar to today's parenting. But emotionally bonded or not, you literally don't have time for reflection. The work never stops. Which brings us to textiles. You spin. Always. The phrase "from the spindle to the grave" wasn't poetic, just practical. Spinning wasn't a craft. It was survival. First, you clean wool or flax. Then you spin it into thread, thread into fabric, fabric into clothes. Every hem stitched by hand, every seam sewn without aid. You're not making art. You're making pants. And shirts. And blankets. And a sackcloth to wrap your dead in, too. You spin while walking. You spin while watching goats. You spin while your husband lectures you about virtue and obedience. But here's the catch: spin too well, and people notice. She makes the thread so smooth. Too smooth. What do you mean she finished all that by herself? That much fabric? In a week? No one's hands are that steady. And the whispers start again. Because competence is dangerous. Excellence? Practically fatal. Meanwhile, your fingers bleed. Your nails break. Your knuckles crack in the cold. And you're still behind. Because laundry's piling up again. Now, medieval laundry isn't throw it in the machine and forget it. It's a full-blown campaign. You heat water over the fire bucket by bucket. You make your own soap from lye, a delightful chemical mix of wood ash and rendered animal fat. You scrub clothes against stones or wood planks, beat them senseless, rinse with water that's already gray, and then haul it all to dry if the weather's good. In winter, you dry indoors. So your home smells like a wet wool barn, and that's on a good day. And should your husband's shirt come out a little too white? She uses something, a neighbor says, eyes narrowing. Something not holy. The trickiest part? You can't even complain. Medieval culture values cheerful submission. Your body's breaking down. Your hands are raw. Your work is invisible but expected. And if you express too much misery, She's ungrateful. A proper woman accepts her lot with grace. A few too many complaints and suddenly, someone remembers the time your mother's cousin had that fever, the one you helped with, and suddenly, your grace isn't the only thing under scrutiny. That's why you smile. Nod. Keep your eyes lowered. Cook the stew. Scrub the linens. Nurse the baby. And every moment, you wonder what's the one small slip that could get you accused? Because in this world, being a woman isn't hard because of the work. It's hard because doing the work too well might get you killed. You've barely finished folding the damp linens when you realize it's only mid-morning. You haven't even started churning the butter. You trudge to the churn, a heavy wooden cylinder that feels more like a punishment device than a kitchen tool. The cream inside was collected over several days, stored in the coolest corner of your one-room house, and now it must be beaten into submission. Literally. You grab the wooden dasher and begin the rhythm. Up and down. Up and down. It's not glamorous. It's not fast. It takes hours. Your back tightens. Your biceps burn. The baby cries. Your husband snores. A fly lands on your arm, and you don't even have the energy to swat it. And still you churn. Eventually, the cream thickens, separating into golden butter and watery buttermilk. You skim, scoop, press, and shape the butter into patties. Then you pack it in cool clay pots and hope it lasts. Hope it doesn't turn. Hope it doesn't bring unwanted attention. Because remember, really good butter is suspicious. Her butter comes out faster, someone will whisper. It's too yellow. Too soft? Not natural. If you mutter to yourself while churning, maybe counting strokes, maybe praying, maybe just complaining, that could be misheard as an incantation. She chants while she churns. She talks to her butter. She's blessed, someone says. She's cursed, says someone else. Meanwhile, your day continues. You make cheese by curdling milk with rennet, an enzyme harvested from the stomach of a calf, or with herbs like nettles or thistle. The transformation seems almost magical, liquid to solid, soft to sharp. But if people see you do it too well, or too often, another checkmark on the witchcraft list. Historians still argue how much these domestic transformations contributed to actual witch trials, but they agree that food making, especially anything fermenting or changing form, was deeply tied to suspicion. Why? Because anything that couldn't be fully explained had to be explained away. Your kitchen becomes a laboratory of danger. Even sourdough bread is risky. Maintaining a starter? That bubbling, hissing jar of living dough. It's alive, and no one's really sure how. The bread rises in silence. You feed it flour. It bubbles back. If it ever spills over at night, or makes a strange noise, it breathes. She keeps something alive in a jar. I heard it growling. And let's not forget spices. A pinch of cinnamon. A whisper of nutmeg. That's not just delicious, it's inexplicable. Where did you get those? Who gave them to you? Why are your stews more fragrant than everyone else's? Because in medieval Europe, spices are basically culinary cryptocurrency, rare, expensive, and automatically suspicious if you have access. So maybe you cook without them. Maybe your bread is dry and your stew is bland. But what happens when your food doesn't spoil? You preserve apples in straw-lined barrels. You hang meat above the hearth to smoke. You salt and dry fish. You store pickles in clay crocks sealed with wax. And if they keep longer than expected? She has jars in the cellar that last through the winter. She makes food that never rots. She never loses a loaf to mold. Clearly, something unholy is preserving your pantry. Food was survival. But survival through skill? Through knowledge? That walked the line between helpful and hexed. The trick was to fail sometimes. Let the bread burn once a week. Ruin the soup every now and then. Blame the smoke. Blame the dog. Blame the fire. Because perfection is dangerous. So you let the pot boil over on purpose sometimes. You tell your neighbor, I don't know what I'm doing, even though you absolutely do. You act confused when your cheese curdles too well. I must have done something wrong, you say with a shrug. Better to be seen as lucky than skilled. Better to be clumsy than clever. Better to be underwhelming than unforgettable. This is survival. And still the work doesn't stop. You patch your husband's tunic, careful not to make it too perfect. You dye thread with herbs you swear you barely remember. You hang the laundry and hope the wind dries it before the rain comes. You kneel by the hearth and whisper a little prayer to Saint Bridget as you stir the pot. You do not whisper anything else. Because too many whispered words, especially in the kitchen, can get you killed. You pull the spindle from its hook and begin to spin. Wool, flax, or nettle fibers, whatever's in season and not too moldy, are twisted and stretched into thread. It's meditative. Rhythmic. A dance of fingertips and patience. And it never ends. You're spinning when you walk, spinning when you sit. Spinning when you're waiting for the fire to heat the pot or the cow to cooperate. And you'll still be spinning on your deathbed, if your hands can hold the spindle. The phrase "from the spindle to the grave" wasn't cute. It was reality. Every thread you make becomes something vital: socks, tunics, blankets, baby wraps, burial shrouds. Your family wears your handiwork. Their warmth is your labor. Your labor is invisible. But not always. Because if your thread is too fine, if it doesn't snap like your neighbor's, if it stays even, tight, perfect, people notice. She spins faster than anyone. I've never seen a single knot in her work. Her thread never tangles, not once. This is not praise. This is suspicion. Historians point out that textile work was the center of many witchcraft accusations, particularly in rural areas. Why? Because it was private, domestic, and involved a baffling amount of transformation. Take weaving, for example. You set up the loom, a monstrous wooden contraption that takes up a third of your cramped room. Thread goes in. Fabric comes out. It's tedious, time-consuming, and, to the untrained eye, more than a little magical. You're not just making cloth. You're conjuring it. And if that cloth is dyed? If you used plants, minerals, or even insects to create that perfect blue, you've now entered dangerous territory. Because dyeing cloth is chemistry. Boiling, mixing, infusing. Creating color from fungi, lichen, and flower petals. To you, it's craft. To others, sorcery. That rich red cloak you made your daughter? Dyed with madder root, soaked in ash water, steeped under moonlight? It turns heads too many. They ask how you got it so vibrant. You shrug. Just luck. But the whispers grow. She dyed it under a new moon. She crushed beetles to make it bleed red. Witch's cloak. Mark my words. You start making mistakes on purpose. A crooked hem. A pattern just slightly off. A drop stitch, left visible. Because no one should think you're too skilled. No one should believe you enjoy this. Enjoyment is risky. Enjoyment looks suspiciously like pride. And pride comes right before they call the bishop. Laundry, too, walks a fine line. You soak your clothes in lye soap, homemade, of course. A mixture of ashes, rainwater, and fat. If it works too well, suspicious. If it smells too fragrant, who gave you lavender? Why does your shift smell like rosemary? Even the act of scrubbing a repetitive, forceful beating of cloth against rock looks a bit intense. And if you hum while you do it? A lullaby, perhaps? Or a rhythm to keep your pace? She sings when she beats the cloth. She's charming her laundry. She uses ash from her fire. You try not to laugh. Because if you laugh, you're arrogant. And arrogance is another step toward she thinks she's better than us. Which is another step toward she made my crops fail. Meanwhile, your hands bleed. The lye eats at your knuckles. Your nails split. The wind chapens your skin until it feels like dried bark. But your family needs clean clothes. And cleaning means drying. And drying means indoors, because if the linens hang outside and it rains, that's 3 days of labor wasted. So now your tiny home is full of limp wool garments, steaming over the fire. The smoke makes your eyes water. The children sneeze. The whole house smells like wet wool, onions, and sweat. But that's preferable to being seen hanging blood-stained rags by the garden. Because even if it's just laundry, someone's going to say, "She hangs bloodied cloth at sunset. I saw it myself." And if someone else says, "She wears dark blue on feast days," you're done. Color choice. Laundry frequency. Fabric quality. Spinning speed. Every element of textile life, every part of clothing a body and keeping it clean, is a potential red flag. So you feign imperfection. You smile and say, "It's just a habit. My mother taught me." You point to the uneven hem and say, "I was tired when I stitched it." You downplay your own skill. Because your thread keeps the family warm. But it also winds tight around your own neck. You scrub your hands raw, wipe them on your apron, and stare at the mountain of wet linens hanging above the hearth like ghostly flags of surrender. Welcome to Laundry Day, medieval edition, where your reward for cleanliness is suspicion, and your tools are boiling water, homemade lye soap, and a stubborn will to not die from embarrassment or frostbite. You've already hauled water bucket after bucket, your arms trembling from the weight. You've heated it over the fire, stirred in the lye soap you made weeks ago from ashes and animal fat, and now, with clothes soaking in a steaming cauldron, you begin the beatings. Literally. Medieval laundering wasn't a gentle rinse cycle. It was full contact domestic violence against dirt. You pound garments with paddles or rocks, scrub them across wooden washboards, then wring them out until your knuckles ache and your spine starts whispering threats. All this to remove stains from cloth so rough it could exfoliate a tree. And still, you don't complain. Because here's the strange twist, being too good at laundry is dangerous. If your family's tunics are a little too bright, a little too soft, or God forbid actually white, people notice. And not in a good way. "She scrubs with something special," they say. "Her soap smells different. She has a secret blend. My cousin says she saw her add something to the water." You did. It was time. For scent. But now you're considering never using it again. Historians still debate whether medieval people associated domestic labor with spiritual virtue or merely survival, but for women, the stakes were higher. Clean clothes were a sign of godliness. But unnaturally clean clothes? Heresy by bleach. And laundry isn't the only thing that's getting you in trouble today. Let's talk food preservation. Refrigerators don't exist. Cold cellars, dry storage, and instinct are your allies. You dry apples in the sun. You hang onions from beams. You bury root vegetables in straw-lined pits. If you're smart, and you are, you ferment cabbage into sauerkraut and pickle cucumbers in brine. But if those pickles last through winter? She makes vegetables last too long. Even the rats won't touch them. She has vinegar that smells like roses. She keeps jars no one else has seen. You've salted meat with care, pounded in layers of salt, stored it in tight clay pots, hung it above the hearth. If it keeps without spoiling? Witchcraft. If your butter doesn't go rancid in a week? Witchcraft. If your cheese doesn't mold in the corner by the fire, despite the dampness? Definitely witchcraft. You see, in a world where everyone is one spoiled meal away from disaster, success isn't admired. It's interrogated. Even making too much food could raise eyebrows. She always has stew. Even when there's no game in the woods. Suspicious. And your larder? If it's too full, too organized, or too fragrant, they'll ask who you're feeding. And if the answer isn't my family, but a few hungry neighbors, well, why does she feed the beggars? Why does that man with a limp keep coming back? What are they really trading? You might have shared a crust of bread. But what your neighbor sees is a pact. A secret. An offering. So you scale back. Let your cabbage rot once. Pretend your stew burned. Act surprised when the cheese comes out perfectly shaped. Because no one suspects a woman who makes mediocre food. Meanwhile, every pot in your kitchen could be Exhibit A. The boiling brine. The crusty bread jar. The wooden spoons stained with beetroot and salt. Each one a symbol of care and skill, and therefore, potentially, of too much knowledge. You sweep the floor with a homemade broom. You murmur under your breath, not a spell, just a to-do list. But from the outside? She sweeps counterclockwise. That's what they do in the old stories. Even sweeping has rules. Even sweeping has implications. And all you want is a clean house. But not too clean. Because a dirty house is shameful. And a spotless one is unnatural. So you balance. You let the soot gather just a bit. You wipe the shelves, but leave one corner dusty. You clean the children, but not too much. You keep the baby's face scrubbed, but you let the toddler's tunic stay wrinkled. Because if anyone asks, you're tired. You're forgetful. You're normal. The truth? You're exhausted. You're efficient. And you're always performing. Every sweep of the broom, every crust of bread, every stitch in a wool sock is part of your act. The part where you survive another day without being noticed. Or worse, remembered. The seasons change, but your work doesn't. Spring brings planting early mornings with cold fingers pressing seeds into earth so stubborn you'd think it had personal objections. Summer is weeding, watering, tending gardens with aching knees and a sunburned neck. Autumn? That's harvest. Lugging baskets, drying herbs, stuffing root cellars. Winter is supposed to be rest. It's not. Winter means managing firewood, rationing food, sewing patches onto patches, and praying the snow doesn't bring sickness, wolves, or wandering strangers. Each season, a new flavor of exhaustion. And all the while, your domestic duties grind on like an unrelenting millstone. Today, your task is food preservation. Because if your cabbages rot or your milk sours too soon, the family suffers. If they don't, someone notices. You string apples from ceiling beams. You salt beans in crockery. You even start drying herbs, rosemary, mint, thyme, a little yarrow. Not for magic. Just for stomach aches, fevers, burns. But that won't stop people from whispering. She dries herbs in bunches. Always in threes. I saw her hang lavender on a nail shaped like a cross. Nothing grows in her garden unless she talks to it. And it doesn't help when your salves actually work. Because now you're not just a cook. Not just a mother. You're a woman who knows things. Historians often note that medieval women formed the medical backbone of their households. You're the nurse, the midwife, the apothecary. But what you know can get you hurt. Even if you learned it from your grandmother. Even if it's saved lives. Because now your rosemary is an enchantment. Your fennel seeds are for dark purposes. Your chamomile, which you use to help your husband sleep after too much ale. A sedative brewed in secrecy? And if you ever gave it to someone outside your family, say, an anxious neighbor? She gave me something for my nerves. I think she meant well. Pause. But it made me dream strange dreams. Suspicion doesn't need a reason. Just a rhythm. Even your participation in a village can become ammunition. You help during childbirth? Wonderful. Until a baby dies, and suddenly someone says you whisper too much while pressing herbs on the mother's brow. You offer a remedy for a neighbor's leg pain? He gets better, sure. But now his cow won't milk. Guess whose fault that is? You skip a festival to care for your sick child? That's antisocial. Dangerous. Maybe you were busy doing something else. But you can't skip too many. Because community matters. You bake for feast days, lend hands at harvest, sing during saints' processions. But you must walk the tightrope between involved and conspicuous. Be too helpful? They'll call you ambitious. Stay too quiet? They'll say you're plotting. You do your part, join in, sing loud enough, kneel low enough. At the communal oven, you laugh politely at the baker's wife's joke. At the well, you ask about Agnes's husband, who always has gout. You never forget a name, but you pretend to. And if someone complains of illness, you wait for someone else to mention you. Because if you offer help unasked, that's pride. And pride smells like witchcraft. Historians still debate whether communal living offered protection for women or simply made them more vulnerable to scrutiny. But in your case, it feels like the latter. Every eye is on you. Even when you're smiling. Even when you're silent. And there's no reprieve. Because after the sun sets, you're still working. You're mending clothes by firelight, squinting until your temples throb. You're stirring stew one more time, turning the bread, wiping the table. You're brushing out your daughter's tangles and hoping she never grows up to carry this same weight. You want to cry. But tears feel wasteful. So you breathe. And you pray. Not because you think it helps. But because someone might hear you. And if they don't, they'll assume you've stopped. And stopping is suspicious. You rise with a rooster. Not because you want to, but because you must. Your eyes still burn from last night's smoke, your arms ache from carrying wood, but none of that matters. The day has started, and so have your responsibilities. First, fire. If your hearth went out overnight, you face a frustrating morning with flint and steel. No matches. No lighters. Just sparks, kindling, and prayer. If that doesn't work, you shuffle over to a neighbor's house, bucket in hand, asking politely for hot coals. And here's where it gets tricky again. Borrowing coals is a social transaction. You have to smile, offer thanks, maybe compliment their bread from yesterday. If you're too curt or too cold, she always needs fire. She doesn't say thank you. She takes without giving. Which talk often begins with awkward morning conversations. You return home, coax the coals into a flame, and then comes breakfast. Which means yes pottage again. Grains, leftover vegetables, maybe a shred of dried meat if it's a good day. You stir it over the fire, keeping the pot from boiling over while also watching the toddler, who is eating something that should not be eaten. You burn your finger on the pot. No time for bandages. Because now it's time to let out the animals. The chickens are complaining. You toss them feed, collect any eggs they've graced you with, and curse the rooster who keeps biting your ankle. You've got a pig to check, maybe a goat to wrestle, and if the cow's in heat, may God have mercy on your soul. This is your cardio. And you're still in your night dress. Modern minds might wonder, when does she get a break? But in your world, rest is sin adjacent. Too much sitting, and people start asking if you're unwell or worse, idle. And idleness? That's a foothold for the devil. Historians still argue whether medieval women internalized this guilt or merely performed it, but either way, your back never stops hurting. So, with breakfast served and animals managed, you dive into the day's main task, grinding grain. Your family needs flour. And since no one's dropping off a sack from the store, you're using a hand mill. You kneel by it, turn a heavy stone wheel, press grain into its maw, and listen as it grinds slowly, painfully into flour. Your arms shake. Your knuckles crack. You have so much to grind. No one sees this. No one thanks you. But if your bread rises too well, if your flour is too fine, her flour never clumps. She must add something to it. You try not to roll your eyes. But again, eye rolling is suspicious. And while you're grinding, guess what else needs doing? Water. It's time for another trip to the well. You grab the buckets, trek down the path, and join the slow, gossip-laden line of village women. Everyone watches everyone else's buckets. You fill yours, hoist them up, and turn to leave when someone mutters, "She never spills a drop." It was meant as a compliment. You don't take it that way. Later, you're mending a garment your husband's, of course, and thinking, maybe if I sew slower today, no one will notice how straight my stitches are. Because sewing is also dangerous if you're too good. And while you sew, your baby cries. You rock her with one foot while you stitch. You press your lips together to focus, but someone outside might hear nothing but silence. And silence, as we know. She's quiet all day. She hums when no one's near. She looks at people, strangely. Every part of your routine is a potential liability. Even your cooperation. Because refusing to help a neighbor with the harvest? That's unchristian. But help too enthusiastically? She knows too much about plants. She works faster than a man. She doesn't get tired. You try to pace yourself. Fall slightly behind. Ask for help you don't need. Tell people your back hurts, even if it doesn't. You fake fatigue just to stay safe. And then, religious obligations. There's a fast day this week. That means more work to prepare different food, and still attend church, still kneel, still perform piety with exactly the right amount of passion. You know your prayers. You sing the Psalms. But don't sing too well. Because the last woman who sang too beautifully? They said her voice had been given to her. By someone. Not someone holy. So you hold back. Your faith is real, but your performance of it must be cautious. Enthusiastic, but not theatrical. Humble, but not defeated. And always, always aware of who's watching. Because someone always is. You catch your breath just long enough to realize it's laundry day again. And market day. And your husband's apprentice is coming by for dinner, which means pretending your stew is more than what it is, onions, barley, and a desperate sprinkle of hope. But first, you need to fetch water. Again. You hoist the buckets wooden, uneven, sloshing with each step and start your trek to the village well. It's not far, but it feels like miles. You pass other women doing the same. No one speaks. You're all too tired. But eyes still dart, watching how much you carry, how you walk, how soon you'll be back for more. Because even water fetching has become a stage performance. She never stops to rest, someone might say. Her buckets always seem lighter than they should. You try to smile. You try to sweat. You try to look tired. It's exhausting. Back home, the fire needs stoking. Again. There's no such thing as a pause in your routine. If the fire goes out, you start from scratch. If you're too good at keeping it alive, someone wonders how. She keeps a hearth that never cools. Suspicious. Historians note that in medieval times, a woman's mastery of domestic duties could paradoxically erode her safety. Too skilled, and you became an anomaly. And anomalies became threats. You hang the laundry. Your neighbor glances over the fence. She sees you pinning cloth by the edge of the fire pit, using smoke to dry it faster. Practical. Smart. Efficient. But then you hear it. I saw her hang her rags in smoke, like some old hedge witch. You don't flinch. You've learned not to. Later, you're kneading bread. Your hands move automatically. You're not measuring. You're remembering. How much salt? How much water? How long to let it rise? And as the dough forms, soft and elastic, you remember what someone said last month. She bakes on a dark moon. It's always perfect. There's no way to win. Bake too often. Suspicious. Don't bake enough. Neglectful. Burn it. Incompetent. Get it right? Who taught her that? You're spinning again by dusk. There's never not something to spin. You feel it in your shoulders. In your wrists. In your eyes, straining in a fading light. But if you ask your husband for help, well, he's working. Or he's tired. Or he's praying. Or he's gone. Either way, you're expected to manage. After all, you're a woman. And women endure. As night falls, you wipe the table, then light a rushlight, your only flame for the hours ahead. The room dims to flickering amber. The children are asleep. Your husband snores. And still, you're awake. There's mending to do. Your son's tunic is fraying at the elbows. You thread the needle. You begin the careful work of keeping things together. Quiet hands. Quiet mind. And that's when you remember, tomorrow is a saint's day. That means Mass. That means extra kneeling. Extra prayers. Extra cleaning. You'll need to scrub the children again discreetly. You'll need to change the linens. Find a clean shift. Maybe wear your nicer veil, if the neighbor hasn't borrowed it. Again. You plan these things in silence, knowing full well someone might interpret your preparations as something else. She always has just the right thing ready. She knew the priest would be visiting. She has dreams, you know. You close your eyes. You don't reply. You never do. Because even your silence has meaning now. You rise, wrap a shawl around your shoulders, and blow out the rushlight. The room falls into darkness. The fire is nearly embers. You lie down beside your husband. His warmth is welcome. His snoring is not. And still, you listen to it. Because it means you're not alone. And not alone not yet is the safest place to be. Because no one ever accuses a woman who disappears into the background. They only accuse the ones who shine too brightly. You wake in the dark. Again. Not to an alarm clock. Not to a sunrise. But to your bladder, your backache, or the cold nose of a chicken that decided your bed straw looked inviting. It's probably around 4 a.m. You can hear the rooster outside already screaming into the void like a feathered alarm possessed. You groan. Not audibly. Just enough to feel your ribs shift beneath a lumpy wool blanket. There's no such thing as sleeping in. You shuffle from bed. Your linen shift clings with the sweat of too many nights and too little laundering. You reach for your overdress, a scratchy wool thing that smells faintly of smoke, garlic, and goat. A mix of medieval perfume. The chamber pot stares from the corner. You try to ignore it. And then you start again. Fire. Water. Grind. Stir. Breathe. Except this morning, your neighbor's cow is dead. And suddenly, your ordinary routine becomes a minefield. She passed the cow yesterday on her way to the well, someone says. I saw her touch the fence. Right near the animal. I heard her muttering. You were muttering. You were probably listing chores or praying to Saint Bridget to keep your knees from turning into gravel. But now it's been heard, retold, reshaped. A whisper becomes a witness. A routine moment becomes a motif. Historians point out that many witch accusations began just like this, with tragedy looking for blame. Animals died. Crops failed. Children got sick. And the human brain, desperate for control, assigned meaning. Often, to you. You make a quiet loaf of bread. Nothing fancy. Just flour, salt, and water. But you made the flour yourself. You ground it too fine. The dough rose too perfectly. The crust golden. She's never had a bad bake, someone says. How is that possible? You feed your toddler. She doesn't cry. He never cries around her. Like he's been touched. You don't laugh. Laughing draws attention. So you nod, say something humble. Oh, I'm just lucky. God has been kind. Because you have to mention God. Frequently. Publicly. In fact, the safest women are often the ones who go out of their way to perform their piety like it's their only personality trait. Wear your cross visibly. Kiss it when you pass the church. Speak of saints often. Pray loudly enough to be overheard. But don't pray too often. Because devout women who weep and wail in church? That's fine. But if you claim to see visions? If you fall into ecstatic trances? If you say something like, I dreamed of Mary last night, and she told me? Now you're not pious. Now you're suspect. You walk to Mass with your head covered, your children beside you. You cross yourself at the right moments. You kneel exactly as long as everyone else. But not longer. You don't want to stand out. You never want to stand out. Meanwhile, in your home, You keep icons of saints. You light a candle every Friday. You teach your children their prayers. But the priest still watches you. Not because he doubts your devotion, but because his job is to doubt everyone's. He notices that your husband listens to you more than the other men listen to their wives. He notices that when a neighbor was ill, you helped her without asking him for guidance. He remembers that your mother knew herbs. He remembers that your grandmother died, mysteriously. You are not alone. And that is not always comforting. Because in the crowded, interwoven world of a medieval village, everyone is a potential witness. And every witness is a potential accuser. So you bake imperfect bread. You let your stew scorch once a week. You let your voice falter during hymns. And when someone says, "You always know just what to do," you reply, "Not really. I just do what my husband says." And they nod. Because that answer makes them comfortable. Even if it makes you quietly wither inside. You are good. But not too good. Clean. But not spotless. Helpful. But not magically so. Because being a perfect woman in the Middle Ages? That's the most dangerous thing you can be. You're mending his sock when the knock comes at the door. It's not urgent. Not loud. But it sends a ripple through your spine just the same. A neighbor stands outside, eyes narrowed politely. She holds a small cloth bundle, her youngest child's tunic, torn at the seam. "Could you fix this?" she asks, smile too sweet. You nod, take it gently, promise to return it soon. But as she walks away, you wonder what else she came to collect. Because favors? They are never just favors. They are tests. Women like you, skilled with a needle, decent with herbs, never quite liked but never quite hated, walk the line between useful and suspicious. And lately, your usefulness is starting to attract the wrong kind of attention. Still, you stitch. You always do. That night, your husband comes home muttering about a man in town whose pigs keeled over. Theories abound. Someone must have cursed them. Could be poison, he says. Could be sickness. Could be you. Not directly. But maybe the gossip trail has curled its way toward your door. Maybe someone remembered how you treated a rash on that man's neck last winter. Maybe someone else thinks your salves are too strong. Too effective. Historians still debate how often medical knowledge became a liability, but most agree, the closer your remedies came to working, the closer you walked to the fire. You mix dried lavender and yarrow tonight, hoping to soothe your husband's headache. You whisper a quiet prayer as you steep the herbs. But you also whisper because you're tired, and muttering anything over a steaming liquid looks suspicious from the outside. She always talks to her pots. She never lets anyone else stir them. She gave me a drink once. I still don't feel right. You shake the thoughts loose and carry the tea to your husband. He thanks you. But then adds, "Don't give that to the neighbors. They wouldn't understand." And he's not wrong. Tomorrow, your daughter's friend is coming to stay. You straighten the house not too tidy and make sure no jars of herbs are in plain sight. You hide the pot with the crushed mint. You move the dried sage from the mantel to a drawer. You remind your daughter not to mention the magic tea you made last week for her cough. Because magic is not the word you need spreading. You're proud of what you know. But you can't look proud. You can't be proud. Instead, you rehearse your lines. "Oh, it's just a bit of leaf and water. I only do what my mother taught me." It doesn't always work. Because if it works too well, she healed Thomas's foot when the monk couldn't. She's never had a sick child. She knows when people are pregnant before they do. All true. And all extremely dangerous. So you pretend not to know things. You forget your own knowledge out loud. You ask questions to which you already know the answers. Because a woman who discovers is dangerous. A woman who remembers is safe. You visit the market and see another woman selling dried herbs. You glance at her setup, too neat, too full. She's new. She doesn't know the rules. She offers you a tincture. You decline. Because if she's accused later, they'll look for the ones who bought from her. You don't want your name on that list. That night, your baby cries. You rub fennel oil on her belly, the way you always do. You hum a lullaby. You rock her until the pain fades. She sleeps. And you? You stare into the fire, wondering how many more things you must pretend not to be good at. How many more careful lies you must spin just to keep the real truth safe. You know how to heal. You know how to soothe. You know what plants work for what wounds. But you say none of it aloud. Because knowing too much still gets women burned. The harvest moon rises, casting pale light over your herb garden, the little patch you tend behind the shed, half hidden behind a crooked fence and a stack of firewood. Tonight, you're gathering rosemary. You don't want to do it by moonlight. You know what they say. She walks at night. She gathers by the full moon. She touches plants and they thrive. But the rosemary is strongest now. The dew is just right. The season is turning. You work quietly, moving barefoot so the grass doesn't crunch, muttering to yourself not spells, but the list: 3 sprigs for fever, 2 for grief, 1 for the oil. You carry them in a simple cloth. Not silk. Not embroidered. Plain. Forgettable. Because even your baskets can look suspicious. You hang the rosemary from a rafter, near the yarrow and lavender. Just a few bunches. Not too many. Because a full rack? That's not medicine. That's an arsenal. You light a candle and sit, staring at the flickering flame. The house is quiet. Your hands tremble slightly. You remember the girl down the road, young, kind, and very unlucky. She helped her neighbor during childbirth. The baby died. Now no one speaks to her. You think of the woman whose salve healed an infected wound in 2 days. Her house burned down a week later. No one helped her rebuild. Historians have noted the strange pattern. Women whose care succeeded too well often paid the price for their competence. One too many recoveries, and people began whispering, "She healed him too quickly." It's as if the village has a tolerance for how much good you're allowed to do. And if you exceed that limit, unnatural, unholy, unclean. Tonight, you review your remedies. You check your bundles. You rub your palms with vinegar to cover the scent of St. John's wort. You tuck the belladonna leaves deeper in the chest, behind the dried beans and old rags. Belladonna, henbane, mandrake. You use them rarely. You use them carefully. And when you do, you never say their names. Because even saying them feels like casting a spell. You think about ergot mold that grows on rye. You heard a woman in the next village used it to stop postpartum bleeding. But too much? Madness. Visions. Fire. And if the bread is made with it? Whole villages suffer. Some scholars argue that early witch panics may have been rooted in these outbreaks, hallucinations from contaminated grain mistaken for demonic possession. You don't know if that's true. But you do know what happens to the woman who baked that bread. She's gone. So you watch your grain carefully. You sift. You smell. You store your loaves where mice can't get them and neighbors can't see them. Because even bread, remember, can betray you. You help a woman with menstrual cramps. Just tea and rest, a little mugwort and heat. But later, she tells someone. Then another someone asks for the same tea. Then someone else. Now you're known for it. Now you're marked. So the next woman who asks, you hesitate. And you lie. I've run out. She looks disappointed. You feel guilty. But not as guilty as you would if a husband finds out and thinks you're interfering with his wife's body. You've been called helpful. You've been called wise. But you'd rather be called ordinary. You throw out half your herbs. Scatter them into the stream. You keep only the ones that smell like soup. Because healing shouldn't smell too strange. And when your own daughter says, Mama, what's this one for? You look her in the eyes and say, nothing. It's just pretty. Even though you know exactly what it's for. Even though it's saved lives. Even though your mother taught you and hers before that. You place it back on the shelf, behind the salted beans. And in the flicker of candlelight, you practice forgetting. The church bell rings in the distance. You freeze mid-stir, spoon poised over a pot of barley and turnips. It's not Sunday. It's not a feast day. It's not even noon. Which means someone's died. You press your lips together and glance at the children silent, wide-eyed. They know that sound. They know what it means. And they know what might come next. Because in your village, death isn't just tragedy. It's investigation. Already, the rumors begin. He was healthy just last week. She brought him soup. He said she touched his arm and it tingled. That last one might have been true. You helped bandage a burn from his smithy 2 days ago. You used comfort. You wrapped it tightly. And he smiled. Said it felt better already. That smile might be the reason you're next. You step outside and draw your shawl tighter. A cluster of villagers has gathered near the dead man's home. You know better than to join them, but not joining looks suspicious. So you walk over slowly. Speak softly. Offer condolences. Not too warm. Not too cold. Just right. Someone says he died in his sleep. Someone else says there was blood. Someone else got help. You mentions your tea. You barely whisper, it was only for the burn. Historians note that in tightly knit communities, guilt didn't require cause. It only needed pattern. And if your name appeared in too many tragedies, too many births, too many deaths, you became part of the story. Not as a helper, but as the constant. Someone pulls you aside. The priest's assistant. His voice is low. Father would like a word. You nod, heart thudding. You walk with careful steps, each one rehearsed. Inside the church, the air is cooler, heavier. Candles flicker. The priest waits. He asks about the man. About the herbs. About whether you've confessed lately. You say yes. You say you always do. He watches you. Then he opens his Bible and reads. Not from the Gospels. From Exodus. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. You feel the words settle in the air like smoke. He closes the book slowly. Then he tells you to be careful. That people are uneasy. That grief makes them look for reasons. That some see patterns where none exist. But he doesn't tell them to stop. He doesn't tell you you're safe. He's warning you. You leave the church with your head down, shawl over your hair, steps silent. Outside, someone whispers, "She was in there a long time." She's not crying. She never cries. You want to scream. Instead, you bake. You knead until your arms burn. You sweep until the floor is raw wood. You scrub your hands with salt to hide the scent of herbs. Later, at the communal well, someone thanks you. "My daughter's cough is better." Thank you again. You nod. Then lie, "It was probably the clean air." You stop giving remedies. You burn your notes. You pluck the label off your only surviving tincture and write, "Holy water in messy ink." Because the next time someone dies, and there will be a next time, you can't afford to be on anyone's mind. Especially not as the one who helped. Because helping too often, helping too well, helping without fear, that's the work of witches. And witches don't live long. You learn to pretend. You smile when spoken to. You kneel exactly when the priest expects. You nod along when someone suggests your old neighbor's miscarriage was divine punishment. You even agree. But inside, you know her belly pain could have been eased. You had the herbs. You had the knowledge. You said nothing. And that silence? That was your offering. Not to God, but to safety. Because now you understand the most dangerous part of being a medieval woman isn't childbirth or infection or starvation. It's being noticed. So, you shrink. You wear plain clothes. You let your veil slip just slightly, so you look a little more careless. You stop correcting your children's grammar. You underbake your bread. You make yourself smaller. And in doing so, you survive. But it's not just the village watching. It's the records. The scribes. The officials. The systems. Historians note how few medieval women appear in records unless they are in trouble. Property disputes. Marital issues. Or accusations. That's when your name enters ink. That's when you become visible. You want to stay invisible. You want no records. You want no name in any ledger that says, "She tended the sick. She mixed the tea. She was seen by moonlight." So you stop. You stop helping the neighbor's cousin with her labor pains. You stop treating your own son's fever with the herbs your grandmother swore by. You let the monk prescribe leeches. You nod as he prays. And you keep your own remedies in your head, locked behind your teeth. You go to the market and buy soap you could make yourself. Bread you could bake. Stitch work you could outdo blindfolded. Because doing less? That's protection. Still, not everyone stops. There's a girl. Young. Too clever. Too generous. She helps everyone. Until one day she's not at church. Someone mutters, "I heard she read Latin." Another says, "She predicted the rain. Said her joints hurt." You keep your eyes on the altar. You say nothing. And that night, when they come for her, 3 men, hoods up, voices hushed, you close your door. You hold your daughter tight. You tell her, never be too good. And then you cry, silently, into her hair. Historians still argue whether the church protected women or damned them, whether community was refuge or trap. But for you, in this cramped thatched roof home with drying herbs you no longer use, the answer is clear. You're alive. But you're not free. You are watched. You are measured. And you are always, always, one miracle away from being murdered. So you bow your head. You cross yourself. You scrape the burnt porridge from the pot. And you whisper a prayer not for salvation, but for invisibility. Because that's the only safety a wise woman has left. The village is quiet tonight. Too quiet. You stir your pot slowly, carefully, eyes flicking toward the shuttered window every few seconds. The stew isn't burning, but you leave it on the edge of the hearth anyway slightly too long, just in case someone asks why it smells off tomorrow. You're building a new habit now, strategic imperfection. This morning, someone came to your door with a headache. You gave her willow bark. But before handing it over, you said the words, "If it pleases God, this might help." Not will. Not does. Might. Because now even cures must be humble. Historically, medieval healers walked a tightrope between folk wisdom and formal medicine, and you have neither protection nor parchment. Only experience. Only memory. But memory is dangerous. So you feign forgetfulness. You mix a weaker tincture. You forget to add the marigold. You water it down. And the worst part? It still works. But less impressively. And that's the goal. Later, your daughter asks, "Why don't we make the good one anymore?" You glance at the door. Then at the ceiling. Then back to her. Because we're not witches. She doesn't understand yet. But one day she will. Because everyone does. Everyone learns what it costs to be good. To be skilled. To be right. Today at the well, a neighbor mentioned your garden. Always so green. Even in a dry spell. You shrugged. Luck. But you know it's not luck. It's compost, crop rotation, mulched herbs, and years of paying attention. Years of caring. But luck is safer. So you pretend not to know why your mint thrives or why your cabbage resists mildew. You pretend not to notice the stairs. You pretend not to see the man with a priest this afternoon gesturing toward your house. You prepare. You move your dried rue behind the garlic. You relabel your feverfew. You leave the door open a crack so they'll know you're not hiding anything. Because you've learned that openness is a performance, too. It's not just the church or the men who watch. It's everyone. Children repeat what they hear. Mama talks to her plants. Old men remember what they saw. Her mother died the same year the priest's sheep went mad. No detail is too small. No moment too innocent. And while the church debates theology, and the crown debates power, you debate whether to hang your laundry now or after dark because your underclothes are clean, and that might be suspicious. You settle on just one tunic. The older one. With the faded dye. Let it look humble. Let it blend. Tomorrow is another saint's day. You will pray. You will sing. And if the words don't come, you will mouth them. Because missing a verse is better than singing it too beautifully. Everything is ritual now. Not just mass. Life. Cooking is a ritual of deliberate mediocrity. Sewing is a ritual of visible effort. Washing is a ritual of public humility. And you? You are a living performance of acceptable womanhood. And some days, you wonder if you even exist underneath it.